Stone face. Questions and answers. What was the great stone face? What did young Ernest wish when he gazed at it? The great stone face was the work of nature. The rocks were put one over the other on the mountain side. They resembled the features of a human face. Young Ernest wished that the stone face could speak. He wished to love the man dearly, whoever resembled that face. What was the story attributed to the stone face? The story attributed to the stone face was that some day a child with the likeness of that face would be born. He would become the greatest and noblest person of his age. What gave the people of the valley the idea that the prophecy was about to come true for the first time? A young man named Gathergold had left the valley many years ago. By the time he grew old, he had grown rich. When he returned to his native valley, a rumor spread that he resembled the stone face. People thought that the prophecy had come true. Did Ernest see in Gathergold the likeness of the stone face? Who did he confide in, and how was he proved right? No, Ernest did not see any likeness of the stone face in Gathergold. He confided in the great stone face. After Gathergold's death, as his wealth and gold had already disappeared, it was generally agreed that Gathergold had no resemblance with the great stone face. What made people believe General Blood and Thunder was their man? Ernest compared the man's face with stone face. What did he conclude? General Blood and Thunder had risen to high position from the soldier. When he returned to the valley, his childhood friends said that the general had always looked like the stone face. Ernest could not find any likeness between the general and the stone face. What is the significance of great stone face? The stone face was a work of nature. It was formed on the side of a mountain by rocks. Viewed from a distance, those rocks looked like the features of a human face. People linked stories to that face. The people living in that valley believed that someday a great and noble person with the likeness of that face would come. What did the spectator see when he went near the great stone face? When the spectator went near the great stone face, he lost the outline of the enormous face and could see only a heap of gigantic rocks piled up one upon another. How did Ernest grow up to be a mild and quiet youth? Ernest never forgot of the story that his mother told him. He was dutiful to his mother and helpful to her many things, assisting her much with his little hands and more with his loving heart. In this manner he grew up to be a mild and quiet youth. How did Gathergold become rich? Gathergold was a young man when he left his native valley and settled at a distant seaport. He set up there as a shopkeeper. He was very sharp in business matters and therefore became very rich in very short span of time. How did people's opinion change about Gathergold after his death? Gathergold died one day. His wealth had disappeared before his death. Since the melting away of his gold, it had been generally believed that there was no likeness between the ruined merchant and the majestic face upon the mountain. What was the prophecy connected with the stone face? Did it come true? The prophecy is a statement about some event in future. The people of the valley believed that the stone face was auspicious for them. It made the land fertile with its gaze. The old prophecy about the stone face was that at some future day a child would be born there who will grow up to become great and noble. The child would look like the stone face. Some people thought it was just idle talk. It appears finally Ernest himself would be declared to be the great man resembling the stone face. Who was Ernest? What personal qualities made him great? Ernest was a little boy who lived with his mother in a valley. His interest grew in the great stone face which smiled on him. His mother told him the prophecy about the face. The boy never forgot that story. He spent hours looking at that face. He regarded it as his teacher. He was inspired to be noble, kind, and helpful. These qualities could make him the man with the likeness of the face. Summary in Hindi. विशाल पत्थर पर बना चेहरा प्रकृति की कारीगरी थी। यह पर्वत के बगल में कुछ चट्टानों से बना था। दूरी से देखने पर यह पत्थर किसी जीवित मानव चेहरे की भांति दिखते थे। पास जाने पर वह चेहरा पत्थरों के ढेर में बदल जाता था। लोगों की मान्यता थी कि घाटी की उर्वरता उसी चेहरे की देन है। एक दिन एक माँ अपने छोटे लड़के अर्नेस्ट के साथ झोंपड़ी के दरवाजे पर बैठी थी। बच्चे ने इच्छा व्यक्त की कि काश वह विशाल चेहरा बोल सकता। माँ को आशा थी कि इस प्रकार के चेहरे वाला असली व्यक्ति कभी न कभी स्वतः आएगा। उसने एक विचित्र कहानी सुनाई जो उसने भी बचपन में सुनी थी। उस पत्थर के चेहरे वाला महान व्यक्ति कभी पैदा होगा, यही लोगों की भविष्यवाणी थी। अर्नेस्ट इस कहानी को कभी भूल न सका। वह माँ की बहुत मदद करता था। वह एक सीधा, सरल और शांत स्वभाव का युवक बन गया। पत्थर वाला चेहरा उसका शिक्षक बन गया। बच्चा उसे हर दिन घंटों देखा करता था। एक बार अफवाह उड़ी कि वैसे चेहरे वाला व्यक्ति गांव में आ गया है। अनेक वर्ष पूर्व एक युवक घाटी छोड़कर चला गया था और वह दूर एक बंदरगाह पर जाकर बस गया था। वह बहुत धनवान हो गया। फिर उसे अपने जन्म स्थान पर लौटने की इच्छा हुई। उस धनी गैदरगोल्ड का लोगों ने एक महान व्यक्ति के रूप में स्वागत किया क्योंकि उसका चेहरा उस पत्थर के चेहरे से मिलता जुलता था। पर अर्नेस्ट आम लोगों की राय से सहमत नहीं हुआ। काफ़ी वर्ष बीत गए। अर्नेस्ट नवयुवक हो गया। उसकी तरफ किसी का ध्यान आकर्षित नहीं होता था। उसमें कोई उल्लेखनीय विशेषता नहीं थी, परंतु वह परिश्रमी और दयालु था। वह अभी भी उस पत्थर के चेहरे को घंटों निहारता रहता था। उसे अभी भी हैरानी होती थी कि पथरीले चेहरे वाला व्यक्ति आने में इतना विलंब क्यों हो रहा है। गैदरगोल्ड एक गरीब की स्थिति में मरा तथा दफना दिया गया, पर लोगों ने स्वीकारा कि वह व्यापारी पर्वत पर बने शानदार चेहरे वाला न था। संयोग ऐसा हुआ कि घाटी का ही एक अन्य व्यक्ति स्वदेश लौटा। वह एक प्रसिद्ध सैन्य कमांडर था। लोग उसकी ओर अंधविश्वास के साथ आकर्षित थे और उसे पत्थर जैसे महान चेहरे वाला मानते थे, पर अर्नेस्ट का दोनों में कोई समानता नहीं दिखी। द ग्रेट स्टोन फेस 2। कई वर्ष बीत गए। अर्नेस्ट अधेड़ आयु का हो गया। बढ़ती आयु के कारण उसके सिर के बाल सफ़ेद हो गए और चेहरे पर झुर्रियाँ आ गई, पर साथ ही वह अधिक ज्ञानी भी हो गया। घाटी में वह विख्यात हो गया। अनेक नगरों से विद्वान उससे मिलने और बातें करने आने लगे। जब अर्नेस्ट वृद्ध हो गया तो एक नया कवि जो पहले इसी घाटी में रहता था घर लौट आया। उसने उस विशाल पत्थर के चेहरे को भी अपनी एक कविता में सराहा था। उसके गीत अर्नेस्ट के कानों में भी पहुंच गए। उसे लगा कि वह उस पत्थर के चेहरे से समानता रखता है। कवि ने भी अर्नेस्ट की बुद्धिमत्ता के बारे में सुन रखा था और वह उससे मिलना चाहता था। गर्मी के मौसम में एक दिन वह अर्नेस्ट के दरवाजे पर आया। उसने एक रात के लिए पनाह मांगी। अर्नेस्ट एकदम मान गया। दोनों ने मिलकर बातें की। कवि ने अर्नेस्ट को एक ज्ञानी, सरल, उदार तथा अतिथि सत्कार करने वाला पाया। अर्नेस्ट ने कवि की आंखों में झांका और उसका चेहरा देखा। उसने कवि के चेहरे की समानता पत्थर वाले चेहरे से की। उसने स्पष्ट किया कि वह उदास क्यों है। वह तो एक भविष्यवाणी के पूरा होने की प्रतीक्षा कर रहा है। कविताएं पढ़कर उसे विश्वास हो गया था कि कवि ही पत्थर के चेहरे वाला असली व्यक्ति है। पर कवि ने इस बात से इनकार कर दिया कि उसका चेहरा पत्थर वाले चेहरे के समान है। यह ठीक है कि उसके मन में महान सपने हैं, पर उसे स्वयं कई बार उन सपनों पर आस्था नहीं थी। दोनों व्यक्तियों की आंखें नम हो गई। शाम को दोनों ही एक सभा में भाग लेने गए। अर्नेस्ट ने अपने विचार रखे। उसके शब्दों में एक कशिश थी, क्योंकि उनमें गहराई थी। वे जीवन से जुड़े शब्द थे, एक नेक कामों वाले तथा निस्वार्थ प्रेम भरे जीवन से। उसके चेहरे पर भव्य भाव उभर आया। कवि चीख उठा कि अर्नेस्ट का चेहरा भी उस पत्थर वाले चेहरे के समान है। लोग उसकी बातों से सहमत हो गए। भविष्यवाणी सच हो गई थी। कवि ने यह सोचा, पर अर्नेस्ट अभी भी यही आशा करता रहा कि कभी तो उससे अधिक ज्ञानी श्रेष्ठ व्यक्ति आएगा जिसकी आकृति उस पहाड़ पर चेहरे के बिल्कुल सदृश होगी। How was Ernest different from others in the valley? Ernest was unlike other commoners in the valley. He was a good, simple hearted, noble, and thoughtful person. He had been under observation. He did not go with the crowd. He welcomed total strangers as the prophets. Why did Ernest think the poet was like the stone face? The poet wrote wonderful songs. He had celebrated the great stone face in one of his poems. When Ernest read this poem, he became convinced that the poet was like the stone face. What did the poet himself say about his thoughts and poems? The poet confessed that he was not worthy to be compared with Stoneface. His actions did not match with his thoughts. He had only grand dreams, but he lacked faith in his own thoughts. What made the poet proclaim Ernest was the stone face. Ernest and the poet together went to a meeting place. Ernest addressed the gathering. His words had power and his thoughts had depth. They were the words of life, a life of good deeds and selfless love. The poet was convinced that Ernest was much nobler than him. Ernest's face had such a grand expression that he declared that Ernest bore the likeness of the great stone face. Write Ernest or poet against each statement below. There was a gap between his life and his words. Poet. His words had the power of truth as they agreed with his thoughts. Ernest. His words were as soothing as heavenly song, but only as useful as a vague dream. Poet. His thoughts were worthy. Poet. Whatever he said was truth itself. Ernest. His poems were noble. Poet. His life was nobler than all the poems. Ernest. He lacked faith in all his own thoughts. Poet. His thoughts had power as they agreed with the life he lived. Ernest. Greatness lies in truth. Truth is best expressed in one's actions. He was truthful. Ernest. Who by common consent turned out to be like the great stone face. Did Ernest believe that the old prophecy had come true? What did he say about it? Ernest was accepted by common consent exactly like the great stone face. Ernest still was not convinced that the old prophecy had come true. He hoped that some day a man wiser and nobler than him would come and would look truly similar to the great stone face. What changes came to be seen in Ernest with passing of time? Ernest was now a man of middle age. His hair turned white and there were wrinkles across his forehead and furrows in his cheeks. He had become wiser with profound thoughts. The valley people respected him and took his advice on several occasions. Why did Ernest become sad after he examined the poet's features? The poet had celebrated the great stone face in one of his poems. When Ernest read that poem, he became convinced that the poet had the likeness of the great stone face. But when he met the poet, all his hopes shattered. He found no resemblance between the poet and the stone face. This was the reason why he became sad. Why did the poet's eyes fill with tears? The poet became sentimental to listen to Ernest. His words had power because they had depth. They were the words of life, a life of good deeds and selfless love. The poet felt that the life and character of Ernest were noblest strain of poetry that he had ever written. His eyes filled with tears, and he said to himself that never was there so worthy a sage as that thoughtful face with the gleam of white hair diffused about it. Give character sketch of Ernest. Ernest was a small boy when he became interested in the great stone face. He felt that the face smiled on him. He wished to love the man with such a face. He was dutiful and helpful to his mother. He grew up to be a gentle and quiet youth. He regarded the stone face as his teacher. He turned to the face for advice. He was not influenced by the common belief that Gathergold or Blood and Thunder General had any resemblance with the stone face. Even the poet's face made him sad. And he was right when the poet himself admitted that he wasn't worthy to be likeness of the face. Finally, the same poet shouted with joy that Ernest himself was the likeness of the stone face. But Ernest remained humble to the last. He kept hoping that some wiser and better man than himself would appear. How did Ernest feel when people hailed him as the likeness of the stone face? Ernest was truly noble and humble. His deeds matched with his thoughts. He received the poet warmly. For a while, he thought the writer of those poems was truly the general greatest and wisest person. The poet and the people ultimately hailed him as man with likeness of the stone face, but Ernest did not agree with them. He kept hoping that a wiser and better man than himself would appear to make the prophecy true. Describe in brief Ernest's reaction to three occasions when Gathergold, General Blood, and Thunder and the poet came to the valley. The inhabitants of the valley believed that the story that one day a man bearing resemblance to the stone face would come there. The first one to arrive was a rich merchant Gathergold. The people were greatly excited, but Ernest noticed no resemblance between Gathergold's face and the face of stone face. Likewise, he did not agree with the people who welcomed General Blood and Thunder as the greatest men, but Ernest almost believed that the poet was the person he had been waiting for. But again he was disappointed. In fact, Ernest himself was accepted as the prophet. True or false? Ernest's words reminded people of the wise old sayings. True. Total strangers from far away who visited Ernest in the valley found his face similar. True. The great stone face confirmed Ernest's view that the poet could be worthy of his likeness. False. When Ernest and the poet met, they respected and admired each other equally. True. The poet, along with Ernest, addressed the inhabitants of the valley. False. The poet realized that Ernest's thoughts were far nobler than his own verses. True. The great stone face stood near where Ernest and his mother lived. False. One would clearly distinguish the features of the stone face only from a distance. True. Ernest loved his mother and helped her in her work. True. Though not very rich, Gathergold was a skillful merchant. False. Gathergold died in poverty and neglect. True. The great stone face seemed to suggest that Ernest should not fear the general. True.